morning and welcome to Daybreak. You're watching it live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at today's headlines. Trump promises to release text of Iran agreement in the next couple of days as questions remain. G7 vows new Russia sanctions amid optimism for Ukraine peace. And Democratic Republic of Congo surpasses 800 Ebola cases and 192 deaths. First this morning, after the initial signing of a deal, the United States and Iran appear to be moving closer to a broader agreement aimed at reducing tensions across the Middle East. A formal announcement is expected later this week. Here's more on this story.
The United States and Iran are expected to publish details of a new ceasefire agreement in the coming days, with a formal signing in Switzerland on Friday. The Memorandum of Understanding, signed this week but not yet made public, extends the current ceasefire by another 60 days. The reported 14-point agreement commits both sides to ending hostilities on all fronts. It also avoids new sanctions or military buildups. Under the framework, Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz to oil tankers and commercial shipping within 30 days. In turn, the United States would lift restrictions on Iranian ports and allow Iran to resume oil exports. The deal reaffirms Iran's pledge not to develop nuclear weapons, which has been confirmed by US President Donald Trump. However, discussions on Tehran's wider nuclear program will continue. Iran has maintained that its nuclear activities are for peaceful purposes. Officials from both sides say the deal could bring major economic benefits to Iran, including sanctions relief and access to frozen foreign assets. It also proposes a $300 billion reconstruction and investment fund backed by Gulf states, provided Tehran complies with the agreement. However, questions remain over Israel's role. US Vice President J.D. Vance said the agreement includes Israel and Lebanon, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is not bound by the deal. Hezbollah has also warned that a lasting truce would be difficult unless Israel withdraws from southern Lebanon. The conflict has killed more than 7,000 people across the region, mainly in Iran and Lebanon. Meanwhile, oil prices fell to their lowest level in 3 months, as hopes grew that the agreement could ease tensions and improve stability across the Middle East.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to CNN's website and their headline this morning, which is Russian warship fires warning shots at a UK-flagged yacht on dangerous course in the English Channel. So this broke towards late yesterday, but what it's now stating is that a British retired couple who were on a yacht which had warning shots fired near it by a Russian warship in the English Channel. Now the warship fired into the UK-registered yacht's path in what the Ministry of Defence has described as an isolated incident. Now, Russia's Defence Ministry said the yacht had been on a dangerous approach towards the warship, but the couple said that they were definitely not on a collision course. In a statement on Tuesday, the Russian Defence Ministry said the yacht had been on a dangerous approach towards it and said that the Admiral Grigovich's crew had fired into the yacht's path with rifles after making several attempts to contact it over radio and after launching warning flares. Now, the incident comes 2 days after the UK military also reported for the first time that it intercepted an oil tanker linked to Russia's shadow fleet in the English Channel. So just something to look out there for, even though it's happened within the past couple of days of each other. They're saying that these two incidences are not linked, but on this map, as you can see exactly where this took place, the English Channel just here between the United Kingdom and France, that's currently on your screen, is where the incident took place between the yacht and Russia's vessel. They're saying that they did warn the yacht that they felt that it was heading into a collision pathway, that they were trying to get its attention and was doing a dangerous approach. However, the couple who were on the yacht saying that they were nowhere near and tried to make sure to show that they were not heading into that pathway. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on the Guardian website in relation to the top story for this whole of this week, and that's Iran and the US deal. Now, Iran's top envoy says peace deal with the US is dependent on Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon. Now, we know that there's a number of issues that are going to be surrounding this deal, and more information of that hopefully will be released in the next couple of days, so we know exactly what that detail means. But Iran and Pakistan have always said that this deal is also meant to cover Lebanon in this. Now, Iran's top diplomat has said a peace deal with the US needs to require Israel to withdraw troops from Lebanon, and Donald Trump has criticized his ally, which is Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and war partner, as irresponsible. He suggested that the Syrian army may do a better job in dealing with Hezbollah. Now, Trump's remarks suggest he is losing patience with Israel's apparent refusal to accept a ceasefire and the threat it is posing to the 60-day ceasefire he negotiated with Iran. And just to add here that Trump said that he did not like that Israel had attacked Beirut only hours before Iran was due to sign the memorandum with the US. But we'll provide you with more information. We do have a guest later on in the program to really delve deeper into some of the comments that Trump said while at the G7 summit this week. And speaking about G7, that's our next top story. So let's go to Deutsche Welle website, and that leading headline there, that is relation to the meeting happening over the past 3 days. So Trump says Russia should make a deal on Ukraine. We know that a number of key leaders have come together in France to discuss a number of issues, one of them being Ukraine and the other being Iran, on the heels of the deal that was made Sunday night into Monday morning. Now, Donald Trump has said that he has had a good meeting with Ukraine's President Zelensky on the sidelines of the G7 summit, and European leaders also look to add pressure on Russia. And that's what the DW is showing as the latest. Now, President Donald Trump has said that he would do whatever he can to help Russia-Ukraine war come to an end as well. Now, if we just quickly turn over, as you can see there, some of the leaders. So you've got the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer right next to Donald Trump in the middle with the red tie, Emmanuel Macron, President for France. You've got Zelensky on his left. Then you've got Mark Carney, Canadian leader, and a number of other leaders, Takai as well, Japan's leader there, Giorgia Meloni, a number of key leaders there. And just to add, this is the reason why I'm putting it out there. If we go to the New York Times, you're able to find out exactly who is there. So sometimes we don't always state, but I wanted to let you know who are the leaders at the G7 summit in France. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview. So you've got President Emmanuel Macron of France, which I mentioned. Now, the French president who was hosting the summit on the south shore of the Lake of Geneva is in legacy building mode because this is his final year as president there. Then you've got President Donald Trump, who's facing bleak poll ratings back at home as for looking up to a tough midterm election and wants to turn the page on the Iran war and its economic fallout. Then you have Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who's also had issues amongst his party with a number of resignations at home and another by-election coming up as well, which could be a strong contender for his main seat in relation to whether or not they want to do a vote of no confidence and get someone else in. We then turn over to Italy, and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy. She once benefited from her close reputation with Trump, but she's now trying to distance herself from him just a little bit more. Then we go to Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who was also attending the G7 summit, and he started on Tuesday by giving Trump a German football jersey with the number 47 on it. A friendly gesture is what he says to win favour. He needs it because of how things got a little bit sour when Donald Trump pulled some of the US troops from Germany after Friedrich Merz criticised him over the Iran war. Then you have Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, which I pointed out to you. Then Prime Minister Tsunai Takaichi of Japan. And the closure of the strait has actually quite impacted Japan's economy and really tested the energy dependent country. So energy and security was a top concern and priority for her. Now, some of those leaders from outside the group of the main G7 were also invited to the annual summit, and they include President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, which you saw, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt, also in attendance, and he has been playing a key role in mediating the ceasefire in Gaza for the last year between Israel and Hamas. Then we had Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, who was expected to meet with President Donald Trump today and represents the interests of the global south. Then we had Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and of Qatar, who welcomed the news of a US and Iran deal. And then lastly, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan of the United Arab Emirates, and is likely to be also relieved that his neighbour in Qatar and the possible end to the war. And just to also add, we had Kenya President as well in attendance. So quite a few names that are entering this room and speaking about a number of issues in relation to what's going on around the world, especially focusing on the Ukraine war and putting an end to the war with the US and Iran. So we'll give you an update as to how things are towards the end of the day for day 3, but we'll also provide you with a roundup of all that happened on Tuesday later on in the programme. Now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on CBS, and that's to do with a brush fire, because a brush fire burning in Miami has sent heavy smoke over a residential neighborhood in western Miami, drawing concerns from residents as emergency crews monitored the blaze from the air. Now we have some footage that is now going to come up on your screens that I can talk you through after they were battling a number of thick smokes that impacted the air quality in the Miami area. Now, drone footage showed flames burning near homes and major roadways. Thick smoke blanketed parts of the area, as you can see on your screens, as residents gathered outside to watch the fire's progress. Now, what is a brush fire? We talk about bushfires and wildfires, but a brush fire is a little bit different because it is an uncontrolled fire that burns through low-lying vegetation like grasses, shrubs and small bushes. And unlike slow-burning forest fires, brush fires involve flash fuels that ignite easily and allow the flames to spread rapidly, often making them highly unpredictable. Now, a resident described the fire as the largest that they had ever seen or ever witnessed. And despite the smoke, some residents still decided to continue with their daily activities, especially within the evening, some going out for a stroll or even playing an activity as well. But as you can see from these pictures, the smoke billowing up there, quite dangerous and providing quite a bit of air pollution as well. So fire crews and helicopters were there to assess what the damage was and to see whether or not they could also quench the actual fire moving around in that area. As I mentioned, it was in Miami in the US. Okay, well, that's the morning press roundup for now and all of the headlines for this morning. Now we're going to take a short break, but when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories, so don't go anywhere.
We are in Seoul, the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories, and we head first over to France because tensions and shifting alliances are shaping discussions at the G7 summit in Evian, where world leaders are focusing on some of the most pressing international conflicts. High-level talks involving the US, Ukraine and Gulf states have taken centre stage alongside broader economic and technological issues. Our next report brings you the latest from the summit.
The war between the US and Iran and the war between Russia and Ukraine formed the main bulk of the discussions here in Evian on Tuesday for day 2 of the G7 Leaders Summit. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the US President Donald Trump sat down for one-on-one talks about the conflict. The Ukrainian leader urging his US counterpart to put more pressure on Russia, forcing President Putin to come to the negotiating table. That's the hope from Kiev. And in fact, Donald Trump did say that he would be reimposing certain sanctions on Russian oil shipments. And Donald Trump also said that he believed the US-Iran issue was disappearing into the, quote, rearview mirror, so he could spend more time refocusing back on trying to solve the war between Russia and Ukraine. Regarding the situation between the US and Iran and this memorandum of understanding that's due to be signed in Switzerland on Friday, Gulf leaders were also invited to Evian on Tuesday, and there were chances for them to have one-on-one sit-downs with Donald Trump, the leaders of Qatar, the UAE and Egypt, being able to further scrutinise the deal between Tehran and Washington, the impact on their region and the post-conflict situation regarding the Strait of Hormuz, which Donald Trump says will be completely open from Friday. On Wednesday, the final day of the G7 summit, the focus will look at global GDP. The French president, the host leader here, leading a charge to try to ensure that there is a more equitable sharing of global economic growth. And there will also be a session on the safety and deployment of artificial intelligence. Ross Cullen, A News in Evian.
Now, Russian attacks on eastern and southeastern Ukrainian cities killed 4 people and injured several others on Tuesday, according to local officials. 3 people were reported killed in bomb strikes on the Slovansk in the Donetsk region, while a large drone attack on Zaporizhzhia killed 1 person and wounded 7 more. Authorities said homes, a shopping centre and an educational institution were damaged or set on fire. A Russian warship fired warning shots near a British yacht in the English Channel on Tuesday. It happened after the vessel sailed close to the frigate Admiral Grigovich. The incident happened south of the Isle of Wight, where Russian authorities said the yacht ignored repeated warnings and continued on what they described as a dangerous course. Moscow said signal rockets and a warning shot were used to prevent a possible collision after the yacht came within 150 meters of the warship. No injuries or damage were reported, and the yacht continued its journey after being checked by personnel from the Royal Navy patrol vessel. The UK is stepping up pressure on Russia with a new round of sanctions targeting vessels linked to Moscow's shadow fleet and military supply chains. The measures come as G7 leaders meet in France, where support for Ukraine remains a key focus. Our correspondent Zainab Farizadeh reports.
Britain has announced a major new package of sanctions against Russia. The measures target Russia's so-called shadow fleet, a network of aging tankers used to transport oil and gas, and help Moscow bypass Western sanctions. More than 20 vessels have been sanctioned, along with shipping insurers and companies accused of supporting Russia's energy exports. The UK has also become the first G7 country to sanction several liquefied natural gas vessels linked to Russia's Arctic LNG-2 project. Is a key source of revenue for the Kremlin. Westminster says the latest measures are designed to weaken Russia's war economy and limit its ability to fund the war in Ukraine. The sanctions also target a network linked to Russian military intelligence. British officials say a company known as Neptune has been involved in acquiring Western technology for Russia's military. 3 companies and 10 individuals connected to the network have been sanctioned. The package also targets suppliers in China, Thailand and Turkey accused of providing military-related equipment to Russia, as well as financial networks used to evade existing sanctions. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that measures target the vessels, money and individuals supporting Russia's war economy and threatening European security. The government says nearly 500 individuals, entities and vessels have now been sanctioned under the UK's Russia regime in 2026 alone. The support for Ukraine expected to dominate discussions at the G7 summit. Jennifer Zata, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Protests are still ongoing in Albania against a luxury resort project by US President Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. While demonstrators were initially opposed to the project itself, they have since broadened their demands to include criticism of the government and its current policies. Protesters are calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Edi Rama and for certain laws to be reconsidered. They also say they are speaking out against corruption and wider injustices and are calling for broader changes to the current system. Turning to the Middle East now, and the Vatican has weighed in on a tentative breakthrough since a peace deal was announced between the US and Iran. Pope Leo welcomed the development and stressed the importance of diplomacy over renewed conflict. Our next report looks at his reaction and the wider implications of the deal.
Always call for peace, call for negotiations. Thanks be to God, there is at least this memorandum, which they say they will officially sign on Friday. There will still be several points to settle, but it is always better to do so through dialogue, through negotiations, and not by returning to war. I hope that it truly is a solution to the war, that the war really is over, and that we can move forward. For the good of everyone, we must eliminate nuclear weapons. We must seek the good of all peoples and find ways to resolve problems, including those of an economic and social nature that have arisen.
Following on from this, the US President Donald Trump has criticized Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over Israel's attacks on Lebanon, saying he must act more responsibly. Speaking at the G7 summit in France, also, he said he was unhappy with Israel's handling of its military campaign. Here's what he had to say.
We had a great relationship. We're talking about some end details. I didn't like that he did an attack based on there's a very minor little thing with some drones that were released, and he ends up doing I saw that attack. I saw where that bomb went. Did you see what happened? That was a vicious, that was too much. Now, I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. They should have been able to do the job faster. It just goes on forever. And when that happens, it throws a negative light on the big deal, and that's the deal with Iran.
And it's this reason that in the last 5 hours, at least 4 people were killed and several others injured in Israeli drone strikes in southern Lebanon, according to Lebanon's national news agency. Despite a temporary peace agreement between the US and Iran, fighting between Israel and Hezbollah continues. The Israeli military said it has struck a Hezbollah rocket launcher and targeted a suspicious vehicle near its troops. Lebanese authorities say more than 3,820 people have been killed and around 1.2 million displaced since the conflict escalated. Turning to southern Gaza, and witnesses say Israeli forces have expanded the areas they control, known as the Yellow Zone. These include eastern Khan Yunis and northern Rafah, where new markers are and concrete blocks have been placed. On Sunday, Israeli tanks entered the Al Tufa neighborhood in the northern Gaza city. Several families had to leave their homes. Reuters footage showed yellow blocks placed closer to the houses. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the army should expand control over Gaza from 60 to 70%. Israel and Hamas have not agreed on the next stage of the US plan. Now let's head over to the US, and a suspect has been taken into custody after a shooting at a hospital in Delaware left one person dead and another injured. Authorities say it was a targeted incident and that the investigation is ongoing.
Police in Wilmington, Delaware, say a 23-year-old man has been taken into custody after a shooting at Wilmington Hospital left one person dead and another injured. The shooting happened at around 3:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday at Christiana Care's Wilmington Hospital. Officers responding to reports of gunfire found two victims suffering from gunshot wounds.
Police located two gunshot victims. One of those victims has tragically died from his injuries. Further information on the other victim's condition and the identity of both victims is being withheld at this time out of respect for the families.
Wilmington Police Chief Wilfredo Campos said investigators believe the shooting was a targeted and isolated incident. The suspect was arrested later that evening in Philadelphia, about 50 kilometers from Wilmington. Charges are pending as he awaits extradition to Delaware. After the shooting, the hospital went on lockdown for several hours as police searched the building and secured the area.
I was in the emergency room, and you can hear the shots go off, and I guess he just got in somehow and had a break. I turned the mic off. I don't really know all this. Everything I know, they just took one of the victims out. They put her in an ambulance. She just came out. But it was pretty scary. It was pretty intense.
The lockdown has since been lifted and the campus has reopened. Authorities have not disclosed a motive, and police have not confirmed any connection between the suspect and the hospital.
Now to South America, and Brazil's Supreme Court has found former congressman and son of former President Jair Bolsonaro guilty of US lobbying charges. Eduardo Bolsonaro was sentenced to more than 4 years in prison after being tried in absentia. He was accused of influencing the US government over his father's legal case linked to the 2022 Brazilian election. Prosecutors say Eduardo Bolsonaro asked US officials to place sanctions on Brazilian Supreme Court judges and impose tariffs on Brazilian goods. He has denied the allegations and moved to the US in 2025. If he returns to Brazil, he could be arrested. Now to Bolivia, which is experiencing a mass wave of protests. And now 2 major unions and other industry workers are threatening to expand their blockades. The protests involve labor unions, farmers, miners and indigenous groups began protesting over austerity measures, fuel shortages and rising living costs. And now the protest leaders demand the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz. They also gave the government an ultimatum aimed at restoring stability. Paz rejected demands, saying some groups have abandoned social grievances in favor of a political agenda. He accused them of taking direction from the allies of former President Evo Morales. China's retail sales have dropped for the first time in more than 3 years, raising fresh questions about the strength of consumer demand despite a series of government measures aimed at boosting spending. Our correspondent Manu Makdoum has more from Beijing.
Retail sales in China fell 0.6% year-on-year in May. It's the first contraction since the country emerged from the COVID restrictions in late 2022. The result came in below expectations and adds to a growing picture of subdued consumer activity in the world's second largest economy. The pullback shows a number of pressures weighing on Chinese households. The property market remains sluggish, income growth has been modest, and the overall economic uncertainty has kept many consumers cautious. Right now, a lot of families prefer to save rather than spend, and that trend has proven difficult to reverse. Beijing has, however, not been standing still. The government has rolled out a range of measures to encourage consumption, including trade-in schemes for vehicles and home appliances, purchase subsidies, and general policy support for domestic demand. Some sectors have seen a benefit, but the overall impact on consumer confidence has been limited. The May figures will likely add to calls for further policy action. China's export and manufacturing sector has provided a degree of stability, but economists have long flagged that sustainable growth will require consumers to play a bigger role. With external headwinds from a challenging global trade environment, the pressure on Beijing to strengthen domestic demand is only growing. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Now to Japan, and its bank has raised interest rates to its highest level in 31 years as it moves to contain widening price pressures. The central bank lifted its short-term policy rate from 0.75% to 1.0%, the first hike since December. Deputy Governor said downturn risk had eased, but inflation could move away from target, adding they will keep monitoring Middle East developments, oil distribution and currency movements before making further policy decisions. Now to the Middle East and oil shipments. Due to the Iran and US deal, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz may not be enough to restore balance to global oil markets. A new report warns disruption to energy supplies could linger, with Europe among one of the regions at risk.
A new report by Bruegel says imbalance in the global oil market is expected to continue through 2027, despite any reopening of the key shipping route. The European think tank says the US-Israeli war against Iran has severely disrupted the Strait of Hormuz, triggering what it describes as the largest energy supply shock in history. In 2025, around 15 million barrels of crude oil and 5 million barrels of petroleum products passed through the strait each day, roughly 1/5 of global supply. Since shipping was disrupted, the International Energy Agency estimates a daily shortfall of 12.8 million barrels, the largest supply gap on record. Concerns over Europe's jet fuel supplies are also mounting. Goldman Sachs and S&P Global have warned of difficult summer supply prospects, while inventories have already shrunk significantly. Even if the strait reopens soon, the report says restarting oil fields and redeploying tankers could take months, extending market disruption well into 2027. It also warns that Europe's reliance on imported oil, with the European Union importing 97% of its crude, could become a long-term vulnerability.
Now to Central Africa, and violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to worsen the humanitarian situation there. The United Nations warns that ongoing clashes and population displacement are increasing the risk of Ebola spreading further. Currently, we now know that cases have moved across to 800 and 192 deaths has since been reported. Let's go to this.
Congo, where humanitarian colleagues tell us that escalating violence in the east of the country continues to take a heavy toll on civilians, constraining aid operations and complicating our efforts to contain Ebola outbreak. In the province of North Kivu, clashes over the weekend in the territories of Walikale and Masisi forced hundreds of families to flee. On June 13th, at least 3 civilians were killed and 5 injured during shelling in the towns of Munda and Buhimba. That's what local authorities are telling us. Essential services, including health and schools, remain disrupted as a result of the ongoing violence. Meanwhile, in the province of South Kivu, our humanitarian colleagues note that hostilities continued through yesterday with airstrikes, with shelling and gunfire reported in populated areas in the territories of Fizi, Uvira, and Kalehe. This has further disrupted humanitarian access and left more people without any assistance. Ongoing clashes resulting displacement risks are increasing the risk of transmission of Ebola, particularly as people move to and from affected provinces. Our partners are ready to respond but are constrained by poor access. As of June 14th, health authorities reported 21 new confirmed cases, bringing the total of 808 cases across Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu. Despite the challenges, we, along with our humanitarian partners, continue to support national authorities in containing the outbreak through patient care, strengthened surveillance, prevention measures, risk communication, providing safe and dignified burials. We urgently reiterate our call on all parties to protect civilians and to ensure safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access.
You're watching Daybreak. Now to a quick break, but when I return, I'll be joined by a regional guest going through some of the regional stories, as well as the key headlines making its way across the South Caucasus. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Let's now turn to the region because we have something that's a little different and closer to home. A film called The Homeland in Memory is a 55-minute documentary that traces a cultural journey between Scandinavia and Azerbaijan, exploring how memory preserves identity beyond geography. The film highlights an often overlooked chapter of Scandinavian Caucasus relations. I'm now joined by the Swedish director and filmmaker Michael Siltberg. Welcome to the program this morning.
Thank you very much.
So let's get to it. You just told me that you arrived in Baku yesterday for a screening of the documentary that you made, and I'm sure there's so much to kind of delve in, and we've got some pictures in relation to that the audience is going to see on the screen. But my question to you is, what really inspired you to create, The Homeland in Memory, and why did you feel that the story of cultural memory was particularly suited to the journey connecting Scandinavia and Azerbaijan?
I think the previous film had some concrete that you can film. If it was music, you can still film music pieces and people playing live, and if it was places even like Shusha, it was destroyed, it was still a place where you can look at. In this case, it's about a memory. You go back to a place you can't really film, so you have to listen to the stories from these people that have some history from this land, that it almost, where they were displaced from.
Yes, and I'm sure there's been it will provide quite an emotive reaction to it, especially from the history of Azerbaijan over late and the different changes in all of that. Now, we know that the film explores how people preserve a sense of homeland, as you mentioned, through memory, art, tradition. Now, during filming, what personal story did you encounter that was, I guess, the most outstanding and affected you deeply?
I think it's Mahira Husseinova, who have a long history, like her mom, the history of her carrying the carpets over the mountains and how she actually kept them, and they're preserved in the university, and how she, still from that inspiration from her mom, will tell the stories about this place, the Western Azerbaijan, to her students. I think that's inspired me the most.
Wow, yes. It sounds very, even you just describing it, and how carpet and how tapestry is so interwoven into Azerbaijan and the different people here, and how they express that particular part of their culture is very key and important. Now, you have previously explored connections between Scandinavia and Azerbaijan in the Odin Code, and I wanted to find out, how does The Homeland in Memory build upon or differ from that particular piece of work?
I think it's kind of the same, because it's like when you think about humanity, you think that's something that happens far away from where you live. It's so different from where I live. But then you realize when you go back and looking at our culture, you will see like the Saz, Asik Al-Asghar he was playing, we'll find the same kind of culture figures in Sweden that are playing a version of that, because like the Saz was actually, the instruments came from this region and came to Spain, and then from Spain up to the northern countries. And he was playing something that was similar to a lute. And he was like a very cultural figure called Michael Bellman. So you find these kind of stories that is like very similar. So you think like, oh, it's so different, but it's very like similar. We're still humans. We have the same idea of expressing ourselves.
Yeah, and did any of those connections surprise you at all? As you mentioned, you know, the different instruments that made its way up to the northern part of Europe, or anything that you saw, whether or not it was food or it was music or different parts of the culture that you thought, oh my gosh, we've really embraced this as a Scandinavian part of our identity. Did you realize any of that?
Yes, I think, you know, it's like you think about even like food, like you find the same kind of food in Sweden. You call it köfte here in this region. And we call it Swedish meatballs.
Yeah, yes.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's small things like that, details, and like how we celebrate, like you have Novruz.
Novruz, yes.
And in Sweden we have celebrate like the spring. We have certain like songs we sing, and even for the midsummer we have a kind of pagan Christian celebration around a pole where we dance and sing like Yali dance.
Yes, which is very similar to what they do in the UK with maypole. Maypole dancing is also.
Yes. So you have the Yali, like the chain dance too.
Yes. Oh, I see. So it's so interesting when you kind of connect all the dots to find out how regions and countries all kind of merge together, and the different transportation of music, food, cultures kind of are in a melting pot sometimes. Yes. Now, the documentary also highlights the cultural expressions such as Ashtik art, Yali dance, as you just mentioned, literature and carpet traditions. Now, what of these elements or cultural elements do you think resonates more strongly with international audiences, and why do you think that would be the case?
I think one thing I think still intrigues me, it's the carpets, because I always thought, like I was when I was sick, I was moving from Denmark to Sweden, my homeland, and I was rolling a carpet, and I was really intrigued by the pattern of the carpet. I remember it really like vividly, like what is this story about? And then realizing this carpet was not from Turkey, it was actually from this part too. Realizing like this, you have this kind of weird things you remember.
Yes.
And when you have people telling about what it means with all the different things in the motifs in the carpets, you understand you can write a book. There are books written about just like one carpet.
Yes.
Have such a long history.
Oh, I see. Wow, so interesting. And I think just to add into that, obviously, this is homeland and the memory of. How are you able to kind of weave in personal experiences and the memories that people have, and also identify the kind of cultural history and structure behind it? Because people forget, which is the unfortunate thing about memory. You remember in pieces and maybe not in the whole context of things. So how was your documentary able to weave into the cultural facts as well as memories that people brought to it?
Of course, I got a lot of help. So especially like the ambassador of Azerbaijan in Sweden, Zar Amadov, who really helped me to explain certain things that I can't understand. And he had his own family's history as well from this region. And even I met a lot of other ambassadors screening my other movies, and they come from this region. So we hear the stories how they were reported and how the memory was like what they left.
Okay, so that's really helpful to kind of bridge that and to piece it all together.
Yes, so with the help from them, of course, yes.
Yeah.
And being in Nakhchivan too, and hear the stories, and go to these small villages and hearing like what happened to them. And
yes.
And they say, oh, we're not from here, we're from over the mountain.
Yeah,
It's like, wow.
A different perspective, really, isn't it? You also described the film as a cultural bridge between North and South. What similarities did you discover between Scandinavian and Azerbaijani understandings of landscape, memory, and identity?
It's kind of hard to say, because like what I was finding out was there has been a lot of Nordic travelers. I mean, there have been Vikings and before the Bronze Age man, but it's always been like artists going to this area, like Carl Peter Maser, who actually went to Caucasus and did a lot of sketches. He was doing portraits of these people. And then you understand, like, people, I think the thing with Nordic countries is that people are traveling. And still to this day, you have Swedish companies, even in Shusha, like startups working with different projects. And you have the Noble brothers having an oil empire some time ago when they have Ericsson, you know, like the switchboards. It was the first in Baku.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we have like all this kind of weird things that you don't think when you start to look into the connections between Nordic countries and Caucasus. You see like even poets, diplomats, different people that actually came to this region.
Yeah, I'm sure, and maybe even vice versa. Now, as an outsider documenting this Azerbaijani cultural heritage, how did you approach the challenge of, and you kind of have explained it, but I just want to kind of delve a bit deeper into that. How did you approach the challenge of representing sensitive themes such as displacement, memory, belonging with authenticity and respect?
I think I was really, you know, they mocked me a lot in Denmark when I was growing up as a Swede. And even like at that time, Sweden was the best football team and they beat them, and when there was a game, they would beat me up and things like that. So coming from that perspective and then having the weird identity speaking in broken Swedish when I go back to Sweden. And then I became the Dane. And then understand I will always be an outsider, but I would like to identify me as a Swede to the Swedish culture.
Yes.
And for me was to, in a way, with this movie, is to discover my own culture and really understand what it means, the different things. And I mean, there's been other artists that have the same experience with Sweden. I mean, there was this Cornelis Vreeswijk who come from Holland, and he was struggling to speak in perfect Swedish. And he wanted to be a pilot, and he was not accepted because he was from Holland. So you have that kind of perspective as being an outsider, what it means. And it means like you want to embrace a culture. And then you go to this place where you find like people are embracing this culture, but they are so they're diverse. It's not like ethnically speaking, they're very diverse, but they agree on something. It's like the culture. They agree on singing and sharing food together. And I mean, the hospitality here is outstanding. It's not like the Nordic countries. Here, like you be embraced. Oh, come, drink chai.
Yeah.
You don't have that in Sweden. We have fika, but it's not the same thing.
Yes. I've been to only one Scandinavian country, which is Denmark, and you're right. I think the comparison between Denmark and Azerbaijan hospitality is not even on the same playing field. So yeah, I completely understand it, and it's interesting that you pinpoint, you know, the displacement of how you felt, you know, growing up in Denmark, but being from Sweden and then going back, and then not having yourself being embraced and now being labelled as a Dane, where kind of not feeling wanted in your own homeland, and kind of like that tension. Yes. That is very, and it impacts a whole number of people because there's so many people that move around and walk around. So it's interesting that, you know, that was one of the key experiences you were able to identify with Azerbaijani people as well. Now, after viewers watch The Homeland in memory, what are the one question or reflection you hope that they will take away from the film, the documentary, about culture, identity, and the meaning of Homeland in today's world?
If I speak for myself from a Swedish perspective, I get very upset when I hear like journalists, we have something called the Kulturkanon, where they try to identify Swedish culture, and they mention like the 50 years of different important culture figures. And they're debating about, oh, this is wrong, we shouldn't do this. It's naturalism and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it's important. Like if this would happen in Sweden, like we were displaced, I still think we will embrace certain things. Surströmming, this like a sour, herring, weird things.
Yeah.
We will embrace the songs we sing at midsummer. It's important, even if like we want to have be like up to date what's happening right now. What's the music is right now. It's important to go back. Like we talk about music, it's like we have an old tradition of great composers. We don't have Sibelius like in Finland, but we have many different. And yes, of course, we have Max Martin and Sara Larsson, important culture figures. But I still think it's important to understand the culture where you're from. Mm-hmm. So if you're displaced or something happened, I think you have to have the knowledge of what's your culture.
Yeah, yes.
What's the backbone of where you're from?
Yes.
And I think the same thing is when you go to Azerbaijan. I think it's important for the young people to know about the Ashik culture and Western Azerbaijan, to say this is like where we're from. because people have been displaced and now they understand how important it is to embrace your culture.
Yeah, and bringing that all together in one, documentary, film really helps to hone that in, and even if people wanted to search more into that, it gives them that impetus to do so. So
yes.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll definitely grab many things from what you've been able to do. So thank you so much for joining me on the program, Michael Silkberg there. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Now we turn over to relations between Azerbaijan and France, which has once again come under scrutiny because a parliamentary commission in Baku has issued a statement outlining what it describes a range of hybrid threats directed against the country. Now the allegations touch on diplomacy, media coverage and regional security issues. Let's take a look at this.
A temporary commission of Azerbaijan's National Assembly on foreign interference and hybrid threats has issued a statement alleging that France continues to engage in activities directed against Azerbaijan. The commission said its monitoring and analysis indicate that actions it describes as hybrid threats have continued in a number of areas. According to the statement, such activities have become more pronounced since Azerbaijan's victory in the 2022 Karabakh War. The statement cites resolutions adopted by the French Parliament on Azerbaijan, initiatives raised in international organisations, coverage of Azerbaijan in French media, and the activities of Armenian diaspora groups as examples of what it characterises as hybrid pressure. The Commission also accused France of contributing to regional tensions through arms deliveries to Armenia and its support for the European Union mission in Armenia. According to the statement, these actions are aimed at influencing Azerbaijan's international standing, domestic stability and the ongoing peace process in the South Caucasus. In its concluding remarks, the Commission addressed the French public directly, stating that Azerbaijan remains committed to relations with France based on mutual respect and cooperation. French authorities have not yet publicly responded to the allegations contained in the statement.
It's now time for a break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with me.
And welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today in the
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording on the 8th of November. Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at your headlines. Trump promises to release text of Iran agreement in a couple of days as questions remain. G7 vows new Russia sanctions amid an optimism for Ukraine peace deal. And Democratic Republic of Congo surpasses 800 Ebola cases and 192 deaths. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to the BBC website and what their headline is, because it says Russian artist and Putin critic shot dead in Poland. Now this Russian artist that you can see here was critical of Vladimir Putin and the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov and has been fatally shot in the eastern part of Poland. Now 5 shots were fired at the victim, including one to the head in an attack on Monday, a spokesperson for the district prosecutor in Lubin. Now 2 Belarusians have been detained but not charged in connection with the case, and this artist has been identified as Robert Kuzakov, I'm hoping I've pronounced that okay, who was also known by his pseudonym artistic name, Simeon Skripetsky, a Russian artist and performer known for his criticism of Russian leader. Now this took place 3 days after he was killed. It's because Skripetsky had travelled to Berlin on Russia Day, which was on the 12th of June, a holiday marking the country's declaration of sovereignty before the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that's where he staged a protest with an icon-like caricature of Joseph Stalin and Putin, and that was according to a news outlet there. Now, the identity of the victim would be a key element for the investigation, is what the prosecutor has added. But it's just quite interesting that this tragic news has taken place in the eastern part of Poland in relation to this particular critique and Russian artist there known as Simeon Skripetsky. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on CBS, and that's in relation to fire. Crews battling a brush fire which was burning in Miami sent heavy smoke over a residential neighborhood in the western part of the area, drawing concern from residents and emergency crews which monitored the blaze from the air. Now, if we just go to the drone footage that you should be seeing on your screen very shortly. Now, this drone footage shows flames burning near homes and major roadways. Now, thick smoke blanketed parts of the area as residents gathered outside to watch the fire's progress. Now, some of you may be asking, what is a brush fire? Now, it's an uncontrolled fire that burns through low-lying vegetation like grass, shrubs, and small bushes. Now, unlike slower burning forest fires, brush fires involve flash fuels that ignite easily and allow flames to spread quite rapidly, often making them highly unpredictable, as you can see there. Now, a resident described the fire as the largest that they had ever witnessed, and despite the smoke, some residents continued with their evening activities, some walking, going outside, and some playing sports. But as you can see from the pictures on your screen, quite a bit of air pollution based on these brush fires that the fire crews and helicopter services were very much monitoring and making sure it was contained. But it did cause, as you can imagine, a number of alarm for residents in the local area in Miami. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on CNN's website in relation to Iran and the US, because Trump attends G7 and vows to release text of Iran agreement in the next couple of days. So President Donald Trump has vowed that he will publicly release a text of the agreement within days. We know that it's been highly requested to find out what is in this deal between the US and Iran since it was announced on Monday morning. Now, US negotiators are downplaying the significance of the document's wording, saying saying that it doesn't actually reflect Iran's back-channel commitments and a number of other issues. Now, an Israeli source said that Israel had asked the US to see the text of the agreement, but was rejected. Now, Iran's top diplomat has said a peace deal with the US would require Israel to actually withdraw from Lebanon, and it's something that is currently being worked between the US and Israel. But Donald Trump has criticized his ally and war partner as irresponsible because of a number of strikes that Israel has placed on southern parts of Lebanon as well as Beirut, and actually suggested while at the G7 meeting that the Syrian government may do a better job in dealing with Hezbollah, is what the remarks that President Donald Trump said. And just to add there, he didn't like the Israeli attack that Israel did on Beirut only hours before Iran was due to sign the memorandum. But let's go to this report for more information on this top story.
The United States and Iran are expected to publish details of a new ceasefire agreement in the coming days, with a formal signing in Switzerland on Friday. The Memorandum of Understanding, signed this week but not yet made public, extends the current ceasefire by another 60 days. The reported 14-point agreement commits both sides to ending hostilities on all fronts. It also avoids new sanctions or military buildups. Under the framework, Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz to oil tankers and commercial shipping within 30 days. In turn, the United States would lift restrictions on Iranian ports and allow Iran to resume oil exports. The deal reaffirms Iran's pledge not to develop nuclear weapons, which has been confirmed by US President Donald Trump. However, discussions on Tehran's wider nuclear program will continue. Iran has maintained that its nuclear activities are for peaceful purposes. Officials from both sides say the deal could bring major economic benefits to Iran, including sanctions relief and access to frozen foreign assets. It also proposes a $300 billion reconstruction and investment fund backed by Gulf states, provided Tehran complies with the agreement. However, questions remain over Israel's role. US Vice President J.D. Vance said the agreement includes Israel and Lebanon, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is not bound by the deal. Hezbollah has also warned that a lasting truce would be difficult unless Israel withdraws from southern Lebanon. The conflict has killed more than 7,000 people across the region, mainly in Iran and Lebanon. Meanwhile, oil prices fell to their lowest level in 3 months, as hopes grew that the agreement could ease tensions and improve stability across the Middle East.
Now over to France, and global tensions and shifting alliances are shaping discussions at the G summit in Evian, where world leaders are focusing on some of the most pressing international conflicts. High-level talks involve the United States, Ukraine and Gulf states have taken center stage alongside broader economic and technological issues. Our next report brings you the latest from the summit.
The war between the US and Iran and the war between Russia and Ukraine formed the main bulk of the discussions here in Evian on Tuesday for day 2 of the G7 Leaders Summit. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the US President Donald Trump sat down for one-on-one talks about the conflict. The Ukrainian leader urging his US counterpart to put more pressure on Russia, forcing President Putin to come to the negotiating table. That's the hope from Kiev. And in fact, Donald Trump did say that he would be reimposing certain sanctions on Russian oil shipments. And Donald Trump also said that he believed the US-Iran issue was disappearing into the, quote, rearview mirror, so he could spend more time refocusing back on trying to solve the war between Russia and Ukraine. Regarding the situation between the US and Iran and this memorandum of understanding that's due to be signed in Switzerland on Friday, Gulf leaders were also invited to Evian on Tuesday, and there were chances for them to have one-on-one sit-downs with Donald Trump, the leaders of Qatar, the UAE and Egypt, being able to further scrutinize the deal between Tehran and Washington, the impact on their region and the post-conflict situation regarding the Strait of Hormuz, which Donald Trump says will be completely open from Friday. On Wednesday, the final day of the G7 summit, the focus will look at global GDP. The French president, the host leader here, leading a charge to try to ensure that there is a more equitable sharing of global economic growth. And there will also be a session on the safety and deployment of artificial intelligence. Ross Cullen, A News in Evian.
Now, following on from that, the US President Donald Trump has criticised Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over Israel's attacks on Lebanon, saying he must act more responsibly. Speaking at the G7 summit, he also stated that he was unhappy with Israel's handling of its military campaign.
We had a great relationship. We're talking about some end details. I didn't like that he did an attack based on there's a very minor little thing with some drones that were released, and he ends up doing I saw that attack. I saw where that bomb went. Did you see what happened? That was too much. Now, I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. They should have been able to do the job faster. It just goes on forever. And when that happens, it throws a negative light on the big deal, and that's the deal with Iran.
Now, at that meeting at the G7 summit, President Donald Trump also spoke about the peace deal with Iran and Israel's fight against Lebanon, and said that if Israel can't do the job without killing everyone else, Syria should do the job. He also mentioned that he considered the Lebanon war a minor one and a place where Syria can take on Hezbollah in partnership with the US. Joining me now to discuss and peel back what Trump means by that is Dr. Julia Rocknefard, a senior lecturer at the School of Law and Governance in Taylor's University in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Welcome to the programme this morning. Now, my first question in relation to this, and maybe what you just heard from what Trump has been saying while at the G7 summit, some people may think that his statement was quite unrealistic given the long and egregious history between Hezbollah and Syria. What did Trump mean by this? What is your take on what he said?
President Donald Trump, we've heard him saying many things that do not materialize in reality, do not have the real basis, do not consider the history behind them. I don't think he's looked too much into history between Syria and Lebanon to make such a statement. He just kept praising the new Syrian president, Ashara, for being a tough guy. And as Syria has been moving westwards, probably it has pleased Trump, and that's why he would consider such a move. But it doesn't carry any real grounds, because, as we know, Syria has had an experience of involvement and occupation of Lebanon starting from 1976, when first Syria came in under Assad as a peacekeeper, and after they stayed for about 3 decades. So for Lebanese as a whole, for Lebanon as a whole, it's a very painful memory, not to that if we don't take into account also the kind of orientation of the current government, which would tend to be quite anti-minorities, anti-Shia in particular, while the majority of people populating Lebanon are Shiites. There is also a significant Christian minority. So to many observers, indeed, it sounds pretty absurd that Donald Trump would propose such a thing. And I think Ahmad Ashara, the Syrian president, already said no.
Yes, and it is quite strange that he did put that forward, because most people know the history is quite, a contentious one between Syria and Lebanon too. So even to announce that, even quite briskly, is quite shocking. Does that actually highlight more of what Donald Trump doesn't know about that region?
One, yes, maybe not relying on the opinion of experts, as we've heard in the course of this war, that Trump actually relies on 2-minute video briefs, and he doesn't really read any information about that, and I'm sure not really long historical books about that. But that also could be a move targeting to reassure the public, the international public, about that rift taking place between the United States and Israel, expressing the frustration with Benjamin Netanyahu that he continues to attack Lebanon, which I think is pretty much exaggerated and performative on the part of Trump and Netanyahu. But who knows? It might be just a psychological kind of move that goes out of normal. And as we've heard, the Iranians actually employed the psychiatrist to draft messages to Trump in the course of these past days of negotiations. That's why they partly think that they succeeded, because they dealt with him as a special kind of case, as a patient that needs to be dealt with the advice of those psychiatrists, not just by the healthy people.
Well, that's quite interesting. But just on what you mentioned, especially when it comes to the US and Israel's relationship, because Israel has said that the deal that the US is making with Iran does not apply to them, and that the peace deal is dependent. Yeah. Well, Iran is saying the peace deal is dependent on Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon. So two different sides of the camp. Now, how might this change Israel's military goals, and will the US put pressure on Israel to leave Lebanon?
I don't think it changes Israel's military goals in any way. And even if we are attributing everything to Netanyahu right now, who is facing elections in about September. But if you look at the opinion of the Israeli public, I think the majority would be for the continuation of the war that would eventually eliminate the Iranian threat, its nuclear program, the military component of the nuclear program and enrichment as a whole, and also dealing with the Lebanese front, which Hezbollah at the center of it. So even if Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer there, Israel will be bound, the democracy that it is, it will be bound under the public pressure to continue some sort of military action. And again, I think this kind of rift between Trump and Netanyahu is more performative, because Trump doesn't want to take responsibility for, in the current landscape, for whatever Netanyahu is going to do on the Lebanese front. But that's just an excuse to not include or not be responsible for that. And that's why, that's one of the reasons why I'm not very optimistic about this upcoming deal.
Well, that's quite interesting, because they're supposed to be physically signing this deal on Friday, and all eyes are on what exactly this deal entails. We don't have any information at the moment, but I know that from what we've found on local reports from Iran and Pakistan, they're saying Lebanon is definitely involved in that. Now, if Israel decides that no, this is something that they want to continue on, and the US wants to separate itself from what Benjamin Netanyahu's goals are when it comes to destroying Hezbollah, where does that leave everyone in this? Is it something that Iran will still go ahead and sign a deal with? Will Hezbollah still continue to attack Israel, and will they continue to do tit-for-tat drone strikes? What will happen in relation to that, do you think?
I would say there is too much significance that's given to that signing of the deal, of memorandum of understanding. It's not a deal per se. It's a deal to start the negotiations about some deal in the future within the 60 days as it's planned, although we're not seeing the final text of that memorandum of understanding. So I think in Iran, that's also the finger is still on the trigger. So even if the deal signed, the reblocking of the Strait of Hormuz could be done. You don't need a tremendous manpower or equipment for that. So the IRGC will be capable to do that. And I also think that strategically Iran understands, and there is also a sentiment, the public sentiment in Iran that's predominant, I think, that it would be better to end it once and for all, because by signing this, we rather are just moving into the low-intensity conflict and not the ending of the conflict per se. So Iran is ready for the continuation of the warfare, blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which it discovered as a great leverage. I don't think this I think it's too overhyped, even the possibility and the very fact that they might sign a physical deal.
I see. And just on all of this, obviously, things are still so tentative with everything that's going on. As you mentioned, that we might not actually get to Friday, seeing as whether or not this signing of the memorandum will take place. But how might history judge this war in future decades, in future times to come? And how crucial was the economics that played in relation to this, especially with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz? How will things be judged?
Well, probably one day it will be, everyone will have always been against it, you know, looking back and reassessing what happened, not only the economic effect, which is, yes, it's unprecedented global economic crisis that we are facing, what the global South is facing now as a fallout of this, and I'm not sure that the American president cares about it, how people are suffering in various countries with the rise of fuel and cost of living and the prices for various consumption goods for maintaining daily life of the people, but also in terms of the war crimes that were committed during this war, something that we used to say never again, to the Second World War, to the Holocaust, and then here we are dealing with something very similar in the region, not to mention Iran alone, but also to include the neighboring countries, which also serve as a platform for the military action. So I hope that we will reach to the idea that someday we'll understand that, everyone has been against it in the hindsight.
Yes, yes. Well, there's definitely a long way to go until we get there. But thank you so much for your insights on this. Thank you again, Ms. Rockenfard.
Thank you.
Now we head over to the attacks in Russia on the eastern and southeastern parts of the Ukrainian cities, which killed 4 people and injured several others on Tuesday. That's according to local officials there. 3 people were reported killed in bomb strikes in the Slovyansk in the Donetsk region, while a large drone attack in the Zaporizhia killed 1 person and wounded 7 more. Authorities say that homes, a shopping centre and an educational institution were damaged or set on fire. Now we head over to the US, and a suspect has been taken into custody after a shooting at a hospital in Delaware left 1 person dead and another injured. Authorities say it was a targeted incident and that the investigation is ongoing.
Police in Wilmington, Delaware, say a 23-year-old man has been taken into custody after a shooting at Wilmington Hospital left 1 person dead and another injured. The shooting happened at around 3:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday at Christiana Care's Wilmington Hospital. Officers responding to reports of gunfire found 2 victims suffering from gunshot wounds.
Police located 2 gunshot victims. One of those victims has tragically died from his injuries. Further information on the other victim's condition and the identity of both victims is being withheld at this time out of respect for the families.
Wilmington Police Chief Wilfredo Campos said investigators believe the shooting was a targeted and isolated incident. The suspect was arrested later that evening in Philadelphia, about 50 kilometers from Wilmington. Charges are pending as he awaits extradition to Delaware. After the shooting, the hospital went on lockdown for several hours as police searched the building and secured the area.
I was in the emergency room, and you can hear the shots go off, and I guess he just got in somehow and had a break. I turned the mic off. I don't really know all this. Everything I know, they just took one of the victims out. They put her in an ambulance. She just came out. But it was pretty scary. It was pretty intense.
The lockdown has since been lifted and the campus has reopened. Authorities have not disclosed a motive, and police have not confirmed any connection between the suspect and the hospital.
Turning to Central Africa, and violence in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to worsen the humanitarian situation there. The United Nations warns that ongoing clashes and population displacement is increasing the risk of Ebola spreading further.
Humanitarian colleagues tell us that escalating violence in the east of the country continues to take a heavy toll on civilians, constraining aid operations and complicating our efforts to contain Ebola outbreak. In the province of North Kivu, clashes over the weekend in the territories of Walikale and Masisi forced hundreds of families to flee. On June 13th, at least 3 civilians were killed and 5 injured during shelling in the towns of Munda and Buhimba. That's what local authorities are telling us. Essential services, including health and schools, remain disrupted as a result of the ongoing violence. Meanwhile, in the province of South Kivu, our humanitarian colleagues note that hostilities continued through yesterday with airstrikes, with shelling and gunfire reported in populated areas in the territories of Fizi, Uvira, and Kalehe. This has further disrupted humanitarian access and left more people without any assistance. Ongoing clashes resulting displacement risks are increasing the risk of transmission of Ebola, particularly as people move to and from affected provinces. Our partners are ready to respond but are constrained by poor access. As of June 14th, health authorities reported 21 new confirmed cases, bringing the total of 808 cases across Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu. Despite the challenges, we, along with our humanitarian partners, continue to support national authorities in containing the outbreak through patient care, strengthened surveillance, prevention measures, risk communication, providing safe and dignified burials. We urgently reiterate our call on all parties to protect civilians and to ensure safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access.
Now to Europe, and a significant milestone has been reached in trade relations between the EU and the United States. However, a number of disagreements between the two sides remain unsolved. Here is our A News correspondent, Anita Sharma, with more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, as the European Parliament approves legislation implementing the EU side of a trade deal with the US. This clears a major hurdle in efforts to avoid a new transatlantic tariff dispute. The agreement stems from a framework deal struck last year between the bloc and US President Donald Trump. Under its terms, the EU will remove tariffs on many US industrial goods and maintain duty-free access for products such as American lobster. In return, the US will keep tariffs of 15% on most European exports. The vote follows months of delays and pressure from Washington. Trump warned that tariffs on European goods could rise sharply if the EU failed to implement its commitments by July 4th. Well, with Parliament's approval secured, Brussels is now on track to meet that deadline. Supporters say the deal provides much-needed certainty after years of tariff threats and trade tensions, but many lawmakers question whether Washington will fully honor its commitments. The European Parliament therefore insisted on safeguards allowing the EU to suspend concessions if the US breaches the deal. The vote also comes amid fresh tensions between Washington and Paris. Trump threatens 100% tariffs on French wine and champagne over France's digital tax on US tech giants. Macron refuses to back down, underscoring the broader disputes that continue to simmer beneath the trade truce. While Tuesday's vote lowers the immediate risk of a tariff escalation, key disputes over digital taxes, industrial subsidies, metals trade, and environmental regulations remain unresolved. The legislation also includes a sunset clause that would see the arrangement expire at the end of 2029 unless renewed. The deal still requires final approval from EU member states, but it does mark a major step towards stabilizing the world's largest bilateral trade and investment relationship. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now to the World Cup, and goals, records and statement victories dominated the morning's World Cup action as Kylian Mbappe, Lionel Messi and Erling Haaland all grabbed the headlines. Now France, Argentina and Norway secured important opening wins, setting an early pace in their respective groups. Now this is what you're seeing on screen. So France won over Senegal with 3-1. Then you had Iraq 1-0 to 4-0 for Norway. Argentina won over Algeria 3-0 in Group J. You had Australia beating Jordan with 3-1 on a penalty, which was around 10 minutes. And then Austria, for Austria, it was marked their return to the World Cup after a 28-year absence with a tense 3-1 win over debutants Jordan in their Group J opener, relying on a second-half own goal and a last-gasp penalty to claim the 3 points, as you can see on the screens. And just a reminder, we'll be bringing you all the updates on the Daybreak programme as the football and the World Cup. It all happens during the morning, so we'll definitely be providing you with the results. And as you can see there, quite a few wins for key contenders like France and Austria. Okay, well that's it for now. That's your headlines and your updates. Make sure you stay tuned to A News for further information, and I'll be back tomorrow morning to provide you with more stories across the globe and in the region. Take care.